The Supreme Court just made a decision that affects every single American. This ruling determines when police can walk into your home without a warrant. And here's what makes this even more significant. All 9 justices agreed on this decision. That's right. In a time when the Supreme Court rarely agrees on anything, they were completely unanimous on this case. If you own a gun, rent an apartment, or simply value your privacy, you need to understand what just happened. This case will change how police respond to emergencies across the entire country. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This channel breaks down complex legal cases into plain English so you can understand exactly how the law affects your rights. Now let's get into this critical Supreme Court decision. The case is called Case versus Montana. Yes, the defendant's actual last name is Case, which makes this easier to remember. Here's what this case is really about. Can police officers enter your home without a warrant when they believe someone might be in danger? And if they can enter, what standard do they need to meet? Do they need concrete proof? Just a hunch? Or something in between? This matters because once police are inside your home without a warrant, anything they find can potentially be used against you. Guns, drugs, evidence of other crimes. Everything is fair game once they're through that door. The Supreme Court just drew a clear line in the sand, and every American needs to know where that line is. Let me tell you the story of Trevor Case, the man at the center of this case. One day, Trevor's ex-girlfriend called the police. She told them that Trevor had called her earlier. She said she had a bad feeling about the conversation. She thought she heard something about a gun, and she was worried that Trevor might hurt himself or shoot any police officers who showed up at his house. Four police officers responded to the call. They brought the ex-girlfriend with them to Trevor's home. But when they arrived, she couldn't remember exactly what Trevor had said. She just kept saying she had a bad feeling. She thought he might shoot himself or shoot the police. Here's an important detail. All 4 officers already knew Trevor. They had dealt with him before. They knew he had a history of mental health struggles. This wasn't their first encounter with him. The officers arrived at the house and started investigating. They looked through the windows. They couldn't see Trevor anywhere inside. One officer spotted an empty gun holster and a notepad on a table. They knocked on the doors. They shined flashlights through the windows. They called out Trevor's name. No response. Nothing. For 40 minutes, the officers stood outside that house trying to get Trevor to answer. 40 minutes of knocking, calling, searching through windows. Still nothing. Some of the officers were actually nervous about going inside. Based on their previous encounters with Trevor and what his ex-girlfriend had said, they were genuinely concerned about what might happen if they entered that house. But after 40 minutes with no response, they made a decision. They tried the front door. It was unlocked, and they went inside. 2 officers went upstairs. One officer entered a bedroom. He saw a closet with a curtain covering it. Suddenly, the curtain jerked open. Trevor was hiding inside the closet. The officer saw what looked like a black object in Trevor's hand. In a split second, reacting out of shock or fear, the officer fired his gun. The bullet hit Trevor in the arm and passed through into his stomach. The officers detained Trevor. They searched the bedroom. They found a handgun in a laundry basket near the closet. Trevor survived, but he was charged with multiple crimes, and he had a major legal argument to make. Trevor's lawyers argued that the officers violated his Fourth Amendment rights. The Fourth Amendment protects Americans from unreasonable searches and seizures. It's the constitutional right that says police usually need a warrant to enter your home. Trevor said the officers had no right to enter his house without a warrant. Because they entered illegally, he argued, everything they found inside should be thrown out. The gun, all the evidence, everything. The lower courts disagreed with Trevor. So did the Montana Supreme Court, though that decision was close. 4 judges against him, 3 judges for him. But here's where it gets interesting. The Montana Supreme Court used the wrong legal standard to make their decision. They applied something called reasonable suspicion, which is a pretty low bar for police to meet. However, the U.S. Supreme Court had already established a different standard in an earlier case called Brigham City versus Stewart. That case said the test should be objectively reasonable, not just reasonable suspicion. Because Montana used the wrong standard, Trevor appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they agreed to hear his case. Today, the Supreme Court released their decision. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote the opinion. And remember, all 9 justices agreed with this ruling. That's extremely rare. Here's what the court decided. Police do not need probable cause to enter a home without a warrant during an emergency. Instead, officers can enter if they have an objectively reasonable basis to believe that someone inside is seriously injured or facing immediate danger. Let me break down what this means. Probable cause is the standard police normally need for things like arrests or search warrants. It means they need solid evidence that a crime was committed. That's a high bar. Reasonable suspicion is much lower. It's basically just a hunch based on some facts. The Supreme Court rejected both of these standards for emergency situations. Instead, they created a middle ground, objectively reasonable basis. This is the key question: what makes a police officer's belief objectively reasonable? The court explained that we judge this from the perspective of a reasonable officer in that same situation. Not what the specific officer personally believed, but what any reasonable officer would believe given the same facts. In Trevor's case, the court looked at everything the officers knew. A credible report that Trevor might hurt himself or others. Mention of a gun being involved. An empty gun holster visible in the house. 40 minutes of trying to get a response with no answer. Knowledge of Trevor's mental health history. Officers' legitimate safety concerns. Taking all these facts together, the Supreme Court said yes, the officers had an objectively reasonable basis to enter the house. The court emphasized something crucial. The Fourth Amendment does not require police to stand outside and do nothing when someone's life might be in danger. Even when the officers themselves might be in danger, they don't have to wait for a warrant. This ruling reaffirms and clarifies an important principle. Police can enter your home without a warrant in genuine emergencies, but they can't just use any excuse to get inside. The standard isn't so high that police must have absolute proof before helping someone in danger. But it's also not so low that police can enter based on weak hunches or flimsy pretexts. The Supreme Court rejected Montana's looser standard. They also rejected Trevor's argument for a stricter standard. They landed in the middle with this objectively reasonable test. If you're a gun owner, this case is especially important. The officers in this case found a gun after entering the home. Under different circumstances, with a different legal standard, that gun might have been inadmissible as evidence. This ruling means that in emergency situations, police can potentially enter your home and discover firearms without a warrant, and that evidence can be used against you. The key is whether their entry was objectively reasonable based on the emergency circumstances. This unanimous decision sends a clear message to law enforcement across America. When responding to potential emergencies where life might be at stake, officers can act without waiting for a warrant. But they need a solid, objectively reasonable basis for believing someone is in serious danger. This decision will affect many similar cases currently working through the courts. Judges will now apply this objectively reasonable standard when deciding whether police violated the Fourth Amendment during emergency entries. The Supreme Court had two options in this case. They could have sent it back to Montana and told them to apply the correct legal standard, or they could apply that standard themselves and make a final decision. They chose the second option. They wanted to give clear guidance to courts across the country about how to handle these emergency situations. The result? Police have clear authority to enter homes without warrants in genuine emergencies. But that authority isn't unlimited. The emergency must be real, and the officer's belief must be objectively reasonable. This is a case every American should know about. It defines the boundary between law enforcement's duty to save lives and your constitutional right to privacy in your own home. Understanding this ruling helps you understand your rights. And in America, knowing your rights is the first step to protecting them. If you found this breakdown helpful, like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more legal analysis in plain English. Thanks for watching, and remember, an informed citizen is a powerful citizen.